September 11th, 2001. A normal Tuesday morning. Clear blue skies over New York City. And then, in a single moment, everything changed. At exactly 8:46 a.m., a commercial airplane slammed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At first, people thought it was an accident, a tragic mistake. But within minutes, the world realized this was something far more sinister. Because this was not just a crash. This was the beginning of one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in human history. That morning had started like any other. Thousands of people were heading to work, coffee in their hands, deadlines on their minds. In the World Trade Center alone, over 17,000 people were present. No one had any idea that within the next 2 hours, their lives and the entire world would change forever. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, commercial airplanes took off from different airports across the United States. Everything seemed routine. Passengers boarded normally. Flight attendants smiled. Pilots followed their checklists. But hidden among the passengers were 19 men. Men who were about to carry out a plan that had been in preparation for years. American Airlines Flight 11 departed from Boston, heading to Los Angeles. Somewhere in the sky, something went wrong. The plane suddenly stopped responding. Air traffic controllers noticed the silence. Something wasn't right. And then, at 8:46 a.m., the aircraft crashed into the North Tower. The impact was devastating. A massive explosion tore through the building. Fire and thick black smoke burst out into the sky. Burning debris rained down onto the streets below. Inside the tower, chaos erupted instantly. Stairways were damaged. Elevators stopped working. People were trapped on upper floors with no clear escape. Some didn't even understand what had happened. They just felt the building shake, saw flames spreading, and heard screams echoing through the corridors. In those first few minutes, confusion filled the air. News channels began reporting that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. Many believed it was a small aircraft, a navigation error, a terrible accident. But as cameras focused on the burning tower, something unimaginable happened. At 9:03 a.m., just 17 minutes later, another plane appeared in the sky. This time, millions of people were watching live. United Airlines Flight 175 came speeding toward the South Tower. And in a horrifying moment broadcast across the world, it slammed into the building. That's when reality hit. This was no accident. America was under attack. Fear spread instantly. Inside both towers, people were desperately trying to escape. Some rushed down smoke-filled stairwells, helping each other in panic. Others were trapped above the impact zones, with no way out. Emergency calls flooded in. Families tried to reach their loved ones. And in the middle of it all, firefighters and rescue teams rushed toward the towers, climbing up while everyone else was coming down. Police officers, paramedics, and ordinary citizens risked their lives to help strangers. But the situation was far worse than anyone could fully understand in that moment. Because while New York was already in chaos, this was only part of the plan. High above the ground, more planes were still in the sky, hijacked, moving toward unknown targets. Most people had no idea that the danger was far from over. At 9:37 a.m., another disaster struck. American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States military. A powerful explosion ripped through the building, sending shockwaves across the nation. Now it was undeniable. This was a coordinated attack. The United States was under siege. Across the country, panic spread rapidly. People evacuated offices. Flights were grounded. Airspace was shut down. No one knew what would happen next. Was there another plane? Another target? Or something even worse waiting to unfold? Back in New York, the situation inside the Twin Towers was becoming unbearable. The fires burned hotter with every passing minute. Thick smoke filled the air, making it difficult to breathe. The heat grew intense, weakening the structure of the buildings. On the upper floors, people were completely trapped. Some made desperate phone calls to their families. Voices filled with fear, love, and final words. Others searched for any possible way to survive in an impossible situation. And then, at 9:59 a.m., something happened that no one thought was possible. One of the tallest and strongest buildings in the world began to collapse. What caused it? Why did it fall so quickly? And what about the final hijacked plane still in the sky? That is where the story takes an even darker turn. America was already in shock. Two planes had struck the Twin Towers. Another had hit the Pentagon. And the entire nation was watching in fear, not knowing what would happen next. And then, at 9:59 a.m., the unthinkable happened. The South Tower began to collapse. At first, it looked like a slight movement, almost unnoticeable. But within seconds, the upper floors started to tilt. And then suddenly, the entire structure gave way. Floor after floor collapsed in a deadly chain reaction, crashing down with unimaginable force. In less than 10 seconds, the massive skyscraper was gone. A huge cloud of dust and debris exploded outward, covering the streets of New York. People ran blindly, trying to escape. The sky turned dark, the air filled with ash. It felt like the end of the world. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A building over 100 stories tall, reduced to rubble in seconds. But what caused it? The towers were designed to handle strong impacts, even airplane collisions. Yet, what followed the crashes was something far more destructive. The planes were loaded with jet fuel. When they struck the buildings, they didn't just cause explosions. They ignited massive fires. Temperatures inside the towers reached extreme levels, hot enough to weaken steel. The metal structure didn't need to melt completely. It just had to lose its strength. As the fires burned, the floors began to sag. Support beams bent under pressure. The weight of the upper floors became too heavy to hold. And once the collapse started, it became unstoppable. For a brief moment, hope still remained. The North Tower was still standing. Rescue teams continued their efforts. Firefighters climbed higher into the building, risking everything to save lives. Survivors kept moving down the stairwells, step by step, holding on to hope. But at 10:28 a.m., tragedy struck again. The North Tower collapsed. Just like the first, it came down in seconds. Another massive cloud of dust and destruction filled the city. Thousands of lives were lost. And in that moment, the iconic skyline of New York changed forever. What remained was devastation, burning steel, broken concrete, and silence mixed with distant sirens. Rescue teams worked without stopping, searching through the rubble for any signs of life. The conditions were dangerous. Fires continued to burn. Smoke covered the area for days, even weeks. This place would come to be known as Ground Zero. But while the world focused on New York and Washington, one final chapter of this tragedy was still unfolding in the skies. United Airlines Flight 93. Unlike the other flights, this one had taken off later, which changed everything. Passengers on board began receiving phone calls. They learned about the attacks on the Twin Towers, about the Pentagon, and slowly, a horrifying truth became clear. Their plane had been hijacked too, and it was likely heading toward another target. In that moment, everything changed. The passengers were no longer just victims. They became decision-makers. They understood that if they did nothing, more innocent lives would be lost. So they made a choice. They decided to fight back. Ordinary people, with no weapons, facing trained hijackers. They quickly formed a plan, using whatever they could find. They prepared to take control of the plane. And then they acted. They rushed toward the cockpit. Inside, chaos erupted. The hijackers struggled to maintain control. The passengers pushed forward with everything they had. A desperate battle unfolded in the air. Realizing they were losing control, the hijackers made a final move. At around 10:03 a.m., the plane crashed into an open field in Pennsylvania. There were no survivors, but their actions changed the outcome, because investigators later believed that Flight 93 was heading toward either the White House or the U.S. Capitol building. Those passengers didn't just fight for themselves. They saved countless lives on the ground. By this point, the scale of the attack was undeniable. For planes, multiple targets, thousands of lives lost. The entire nation was in shock. For the first time in history, all flights across the United States were grounded. The skies, once filled with movement, became completely silent. No one knew what would come next. Fear, uncertainty, and grief spread across the country. And one question echoed everywhere. Who was behind this? The answer would soon point to a terrorist group that the world would never forget. But the truth behind it was even deeper and more complex than anyone imagined. The question now echoed across the entire world. Who was behind these attacks and why? As investigators began piecing together the evidence, one name kept appearing again and again. Al-Qaeda, a terrorist organization led by Osama bin Laden. But to truly understand why 9/11 happened, we have to go back years before that morning. Al-Qaeda was formed in the late 1980s. Over time, its focus shifted toward opposing the United States. Osama bin Laden strongly criticized American involvement in the Middle East, especially the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, support for certain governments, and growing global influence. To him, the United States was not just a country. It was a symbol of power he wanted to challenge. And so, a plan began to take shape. This was not a sudden idea. The 9/11 attacks were carefully planned over several years. Every detail was considered. Every step was calculated. The strategy was both simple and terrifying. Use commercial airplanes as weapons. Turn everyday travel into something deadly. The attackers entered the United States legally. They lived normal lives, blending into society. Some of them even took flight training, not to land planes, but to control them. On September 11, 2001, 19 hijackers boarded for different flights, armed with simple tools like box cutters. They took control of the aircraft mid-air. At that time, airport security was far less strict. Cockpit doors were not heavily protected. Screening systems were limited, and those gaps were enough. After the attacks, investigators discovered something deeply concerning. There had been warning signs, pieces of intelligence, scattered across different agencies. But those pieces were never fully connected. Miscommunication, lack of coordination, and underestimation of the threat allowed the plan to succeed. The impact of 9/11 was immediate and global. The United States responded by declaring a war on terror. Soon after, military operations began in Afghanistan. The goal was clear: dismantle al-Qaeda and capture Osama bin Laden. Countries around the world tightened their security. Airports changed forever. Strict screenings, reinforced cockpit doors, no-fly lists, advanced surveillance. Air travel would never be the same again. For years, Osama bin Laden remained hidden, becoming the most wanted man in the world. Then, nearly a decade later, in 2011, U.S. forces located him in Pakistan. In a secret operation, he was killed. For many, it brought a sense of closure. But the story of 9/11 is not just about attacks and retaliation. It is about people. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost that day. They were not just numbers. They were parents, children, friends, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Firefighters, police officers, first responders, who ran toward danger while others ran away. Many of them never returned. In the years that followed, New York began to rebuild. At Ground Zero, a memorial now stands. Two massive reflecting pools mark the places where the towers once stood. The names of the victims are engraved in stone, a permanent reminder of loss and sacrifice. Beside it rises a new tower, One World Trade Center, a symbol that even after destruction, a nation can rise again. 9/11 changed the world in ways no one could have imagined. It reshaped global security, international relations, and the way nations respond to threats. But beyond policies and politics, it revealed something deeper: the strength of human courage, the bravery of strangers helping strangers, the power of unity in the face of tragedy. That morning began like any other. Clear skies, normal routines. But within hours, history was rewritten. September 11th, 2001 is not just a date. It is a reminder of how fragile life can be and how strong humanity can become. Because even in the darkest moments, light always finds a way to rise.